Welcome to the Gearbox. Join us today as we shift through the gears.
All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Gearbox. I am your host, Chris. Today, I want to talk about something that I think has been kind of ruled out over the generations of, I guess, like modifying your vehicle, like kind of in all industries, whether it comes to drifting, drag racing, track racing, off-roading. A lot of older vehicles, I noticed. Well, I guess let's round it up, right? Dummy lights and buzzers or warning alarms. I think all too often we find ourselves trusting a simple little indicator light. And granted, that's going to change over the years with more complex motors and more complex systems and, electronic fuel injection over carbureted, controlled timing. There are so many different elements that have kind of gone into newer motors that I think we feel like we can comfortably rule out the buzzer or like a warning alarm. Now this might just be an old kind of thought that I have. I guess some would say it's archaic because we feel that we can fully trust a dummy light, but I want to propose the question. When you are driving down the highway, when you're in the middle of a race, when you're in the middle of a technical section off-roading, or handling icy terrain, how often are you actually staring down at your dash? I don't think too often. Most of the time when I'm out off-roading, I really don't find myself looking down at the dash too often. Every now and then I might give it a quick glance just to see if anything's gone haywire, but for the most part, I'm just kind of cruising, watching where I'm going, especially if I'm tackling rocks or, again, like a technical section. I would also propose the same question to anyone who is track driving or anyone who is drag racing or anyone who is drifting. Now, granted, when we are getting into these chats of different forms of driving, different automotive platforms, there's going to be differences and changes. Of course, you're going to be removing or adding to or from the motor, to or from different sensors. Sometimes, depending on how heavy the application, you'll be reprogramming the ECU, customizing your ECU. So that can have an effect on warning lights or I guess any kind of a warning alarm if you have one. And I guess the reason why I harp on having a warning alarm, especially in a heavily modified vehicle, I know for the most part, if it's going to be your daily driver, or if you have like an off-road rig and it's also your daily driver, having a warning alarm might not be too conducive, or it's an addition that you don't really want to deal with or have to worry about and find a place for a buzzer and hook it all up. And it's understandable, especially on a newer vehicle. If you have in my case, a third gen Tacoma, right? Like I don't want to go add one in. But I guess I'm actually starting to question if maybe I should or I shouldn't. Strictly because the last time I went out, wheeling in some thick mud, I had a check engine light come on. And I don't keep a code reader on me, which I think from now on I will. I used to always have an OBD2 kind of code reader so that I could pull codes immediately and see if what I was dealing with was going to be detrimental or not. But I think it also would have been handy if I did have something that would have indicated like, hey, there's an issue. Because I drove for probably a couple of miles before I actually noticed the check engine light. And granted, there are many redundant systems in a vehicle that, a check engine light can come on for a variety of problems: a fouled sensor, bad connection, failed anything can pretty much promote a check engine light. But I think it's worth noting that, if you have more of a heavily modified rig, if you do have kind of a custom build that, it might be worth installing a warning alarm and not just trusting check, dummy lights, if you will. And if you are going to have dummy lights on a custom rig, at least put them in a visible area. A few years ago, I had a little bit of a sand rail that I was working on, and I made sure to put all of my dummy lights kind of up in plain sight. I also had a warning alarm too next to them, so that at least that way everything was visible. So oil pressure, coolant, basically any sort of kind of like issue that would arise. Really, at the time, it was just oil pressure, coolant, oil level. Any one of those lights could have gone off, and luckily they're right at my eye level. Granted, this was just a sand rail that I was tooling around in. It wasn't. It was trailered. Didn't have to take it on and off the highway, but it was nice because there were a few times where, oil pressure would get low, and that was just due to a bad sensor. There wasn't really ever a time I had low oil, or had caused any major damage to that rig. So I think it's important. I think it's important that we kind of harp back to old methods of protecting our vehicles, because as things progress, as technology advances, I think we're losing sight of the things that also helped mitigate larger issues, future problems that you could see due to internal damage caused because you just didn't notice or know what was going on. I also want to bring up the fact that on most marine applications, you'll have a warning alarm. You'll have a warning buzzer that'll go off if you have low oil pressure, if you have an overheat, if you have anything that might cause any major damage. There usually is a warning buzzer that kind of goes off. So I think these are things that we need to look back into. I'll definitely let you guys know if I add it to my rig. I'm kind of toying with the idea right now. I would need to figure out how I would do that. But I definitely think that it's something I'm going to do. Because even let's take in tire pressure monitoring systems like TPS systems. You're just going to have a TPS light that goes off. You're just going to have a tire pressure sensor light that goes off on the dash. And a lot of people, I would say, kind of go dash blind. You don't pay attention to the TPS sensor. Granted, I wouldn't rig a warning alarm onto that just because I air down the vehicle and they would just continuously go off while I'm driving. So probably not so much for that. But I think it's a good example of, kind of a sensor light that you'd have on the vehicle that you just wouldn't really pay much mind to. There are also people I know that have tire pressure lights on, and they just drive around and ignore it. So, there are a few things where it can come in handy. But I guess just to keep the episode kind of short, simple, and sweet, maybe we should look into more than just dummy lights. Maybe we should also look into warning alarms. And with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thank you for listening and not burning the clutch. Join us again later this week for another episode of The Gearbox.